Somebody set fire to the dress 2 hours before the wedding. It burned in the middle of the yard, in the grey light before sunrise. By the time Ndidi came running out of her hut, there was nothing left to save. She put her hands straight into the ashes anyway. She was still holding them when the first neighbors arrived. You have to understand what that dress was. Ndidi was 22. She was an orphan. She wove baskets and sold them at the market. And she was poor in the way that means you count things. For 2 years she had saved cloth, not money. Cloth. Every market day, when her baskets were sold, she walked past the fruit sellers without stopping. She went to the cloth trader and bought one small scrap. The pieces too short to sell, they cost almost nothing, and almost nothing was what she had. She kept them in a wooden chest under her bed, and at night, by a small oil lamp, she sewed them together. 2 years, 91 pieces, no to the same color, every stitch by hand. People laughed at that dress. Some of them were kind about it. Some of them were not. They called it the poor girl's dress. Ndidi never argued. She would just smile and say the same thing. It was not made with money. It was made with patience. Now it was ash, and standing at the edge of the yard, in fine cloth with her arms folded, the richest woman in the village watched it burn and did not say one word. By sunrise, the whole village knew there would be no wedding. A bride cannot stand before the elders with nothing to wear. But at about 8 o'clock that morning, an old woman walked into that yard carrying something folded in both hands. Then another came, then 4 more. And by the middle of that day, women were walking in from villages 2 hours away, every one of them carrying a folded piece of cloth. Stay with me to the end of this one. If you are already angry, if you already want to know who walked into that yard before sunrise, then do me one small kindness before we go on. Tap the like button and tell me in the comments the name of the town or country where you are watching from. And subscribe to our family. Ndidi lived at the end of the village in a one-room hut with a good roof and almost nothing inside it. Her parents died when she was 9. A fever took both of them in the same month. She had no brothers and no sisters. An old neighbor raised her until she was 14, and then that woman died too. And after that, Ndidi raised herself. She learned to weave baskets, and she was very good at it. Her baskets were tight and even, and they lasted 4 years. Traders asked for them by name. But baskets do not make anybody rich. They make you enough. Enough for food, a roof, 1 wrapper a year. She was quiet. She did not gossip, and she did not complain. And if you were sick, she would come and sit with you without being asked. When old Mama Titi broke her hip, it was Ndidi who carried her water for 6 weeks and never mentioned it to anybody. The village liked her. That matters later. And then there was Obi. Obi was a farmer. He was 26, and he was not handsome in any way that would make you turn your head, and he was one of the steadiest men in that village. He grew yams, and he grew them well. He said little. When he said something, it was true. He had been coming past her stall at the market for 2 years before he ever said anything that was not about baskets. When he finally spoke to her properly, he did not say anything clever. He said, "I have watched you for 2 years. You are the same person when nobody is looking. I would like to marry you." And Ndidi, who had been alone since she was 14, put her face in her hands and cried in the middle of a market. They set the wedding for the following harvest. That gave her 2 years, and that is when she started the dress. She could not buy cloth. Not real cloth. Not the kind a bride wears. A bride's cloth in that village cost more than Ndidi earned in 6 months. So she did what she could do. Every market day, after her baskets were sold, she went to the cloth trader and bought 1 scrap. The offcuts, the ends. Pieces the length of your hand. They cost so little that the trader's assistant used to laugh at her. She took them home and she put them in the wooden chest under her bed. And every night, before she slept, she sewed 91 pieces. In the end, green, brown, faded blue, 1 bright yellow, 1 deep red, she had saved for 4 months to afford. She laid them out on her floor 100 times before she was happy. She sewed them by lamplight with a needle she had been given. It took 2 years. And it was, when it was finished, genuinely beautiful. Not because it was fine, because you could see the work in it. You could look at that dress and see how long somebody had wanted something. People talked about it. Some of them talked kindly. Have you seen what Ndidi is making? Some of them did not. A poor girl's dress. Rags stitched together. Ndidi did not mind either way. She had her answer, and she gave it to everybody the same. It was not made with money. It was made with patience. And there was one woman in that village who could not stand the sight of it. Her name was Mama Ifioma. She was the cloth trader, the wealthiest one, the one with the big stall and the good stock and the gold at her ears. She had a large house on the good side of the village, and 2 grown sons, and a husband who had left her comfortable when he died. She had also, for 30 years, been the woman whose cloth every bride in that village wore. That was what she was proud of. Not the money, the position. When a girl got married, she came to Mama Ifema, and Mama Ifema chose the cloth and named the price and was thanked for it. Ndidi had never come to her stall for anything but scraps, and now the whole village was talking about a wedding dress that had cost almost nothing. Mama Ifema said nothing about it in public. In public, she was gracious, but at her stall, to her assistant, she said it more than once. A poor bride has no place standing beside respected families. The wedding was set for the last week of harvest. The drums were arranged. Obi's people were coming from 2 villages over, and there was one more thing, and it matters. In that village there was an old custom about weddings. The bride had to stand before the elders in her wedding cloth, before the sun touched the hills, not after. Before. If the cloth was not ready, if the bride did not come, then the marriage could not be held that year. It waited a full year. Nobody could remember it ever happening, but everybody knew the rule. The wedding morning came. Ndidi woke before the light. She had barely slept. She lay on her mat, in the dark, and listened to the first birds, and thought, today. Then she smelled smoke. She was out of the door before she was properly awake, and there, in the middle of her own swept yard, in the grey half-light, her wedding dress was burning. Somebody had taken it out of the chest. Somebody had carried it outside and laid it on the bare ground, and set fire to it. It was already gone. 2 years of cloth burns very fast. Ndidi did not scream. She got down on her knees and pushed her bare hands into it, into the ash and the last of the flames, trying to pull something out, a piece. One piece, anything. There was nothing. It came apart in her fingers. Black ash, warm, lifting on the morning air and blowing away across her yard. That was how the neighbors found her, on her knees with her hands black to the wrist, holding nothing. The village woke fast. After that, people came running with water that was no longer needed. Somebody screamed. Somebody sent a child to fetch Obi. And at the edge of the yard, standing where the path met the fence, was Mama Ifema. She had come with the others. She was already dressed for the wedding, in very good cloth, with her gold in her ears. She stood with her arms folded, and she looked at the ashes, and at the girl kneeling in them. She did not cry. She did not say anything. She had been in that yard 40 minutes earlier, and nobody in that village knew it, and nobody would know it for a very long time. Obi came at a run. He was a slow, calm man, and people who saw him that morning said they had never seen him move like that. He came into the yard and stopped and looked at the ashes, and then at Ndidi, and something happened in his face. He walked over and he got down on the ground beside her, in the ash, in his wedding clothes. She could not look at him. "It's gone," she said. "Obi, it's all gone." And Obi took both her black, burned hands in his and held them. "Ndidi, look at me." She would not. "Look at me." She looked at him. "Whether you wear silk or simple cloth," he said, "I will still marry you. Today, I will marry you in what you are standing in." And Ndidi started to cry properly then, because it was a good thing to say, and because they both knew it did not solve anything. Because it was not about the cloth, it was about the custom. The bride stands before the elders in her wedding cloth, before the sun touches the hills. She had no wedding cloth. She had nothing at all. By 7 o'clock in the morning, everybody knew, and the village split in half. Some were angry. They stood in the yard and said it out loud. This was wickedness. Somebody walked in here in the dark and burned a girl's dress on her wedding morning. The others did not say it loudly. They said it at the edges, in 2s and 3s, on the path. Well, she should not have expected so much. A wedding dress out of scraps, in front of Obi's family, from 2 villages away. Poor people dream too big. That is the truth of it. Somebody has to say it. Ndidi heard some of it. That was the part that hurt worse than the fire. She sat on the step of her hut with her hands wrapped in a wet cloth, and she heard people she had carried water for saying that she had dreamed too big, and Mama Ifeoma came to comfort her. She came right through the middle of that yard in her fine cloth, and she knelt down in front of Ndidi, and she took her wrapped hands very gently. "My daughter," she said, "my poor daughter, who would do such a thing?" And the whole village watched the richest woman in it kneel in the ashes to comfort a poor orphan. And several people said afterwards that it was the kindest thing they had seen that year. "You must not shame yourself further, Mama," Ifeoma said softly. "Do you hear me? Let the wedding wait. A year is not so long. Next year we will do it properly." She patted her hand. "You are a good girl. But a bride must be dressed. It is not right otherwise. It is not respectful to Obi's family." Ndidi did not answer. She was too tired to answer. Mama Ifeoma stood up and brushed the ash off her wrapper and looked around the yard at everybody watching her. "The wedding should be postponed," she said. "That is my advice, for the girl's own sake." And a good many people nodded, because it sounded sensible, and because it was being said by a woman in gold earrings. Nobody noticed old Mama Tita leave. She was 81 years old. She had come with the others at first light, and she had stood at the back of that crowd and said nothing at all for 2 hours. She had watched the girl in the ashes. She had listened to every single word Mama Ifeoma said, and at some point in the middle of it, she turned around and walked out of that yard and went home. Nobody paid any attention. Old women get tired. She was gone for nearly an hour. She came back at about 8 o'clock, walking slowly, the way she walked since her hip. She was carrying something folded in both hands, held against her chest. The yard went quiet as she came through it. She did not look at anybody. She went straight to the step where Ndidi was sitting, and she lowered herself down in front of her, which took her some time, and nobody helped her, because nobody understood yet what was happening. Then she put the folded thing into Ndidi's lap. It was cloth, old cloth, faded almost white at the folds, a pale green that had once been bright. It was about the size of 2 hands. "Mama, that is from my wedding dress," said Mama Tite. The yard went completely silent. "I was married in 1961, the old woman said. "I wore that. My husband is 40 years dead, and I have kept it in a box since the day we buried him." She pushed it gently into the girl's hands. "It blessed my marriage for 40 years. Today, let it bless yours." Ndidi looked down at the cloth in her lap. "Mama, I cannot take this." "You are not taking it," sighed Mama Titi. "I am giving it. There is a difference, and you are too young to argue with me about it." And then she looked up at the whole crowd standing in that yard, and she said, not loudly, because she did not have a loud voice anymore, the sentence that changed that day. "Are the rest of you going to sit there?" Nobody moved for about 4 seconds. Then a woman near the fence turned around and walked out of the yard, fast 10-2 more. Then a young woman who had been married 8 months earlier picked up her wrapper and ran. Within 20 minutes, there were women coming back into that yard from every direction, and every single one of them was carrying something folded. A widow of 60 brought a strip of deep red. A woman brought the sleeve of a dress she had worn at 9. 2 sisters brought 2 pieces of the same cloth, because they had been married in the same month, and their mother had bought 1 length and cut it in half. A young wife came with her baby on her back and a square of white cloth in her hand and said, "I was married in April. It is the only good thing I own," and put it down and would not take it back. They kept coming. And here is the thing that nobody expected. It went out of the village. Somebody's cousin carried the story to the next village on the morning road, and by 10 o'clock there were women walking in from Umuoji, an hour away. By 11 there were women from further than that, women Ndidi had never met and would never see again, walking up the road in the heat with a piece of folded cloth in their hands, because somebody had told them that a girl's wedding dress had been burned on her wedding morning. Ndidi sat on that step and could not speak at all. She just kept saying, "Thank you," to every woman, "Thank you, thank you," until her voice was gone. And Mama Ifeoma stood at the edge of that yard and watched the pile of cloth in the girl's lap grow, and she did not move, and her face did not change, and inside her something was going very cold. It was Mama Tite, who said the obvious thing. Cloth is not a dress. Who is sewing? It was after 10. The sun was already high, and everybody in that yard did the same arithmetic at the same time and came to the same answer. The sun touches the hills at about 6. 7 hours. To cut, match, join, and finish a wedding dress from about 60 pieces of cloth that had never been meant to go together. It should not have been possible. They tried anyway. They moved everything into the shade of the big tree in the village square, because Ndidi's yard was too small. Somebody brought mats, somebody brought every needle in the village. And that square filled up. Grandmothers sat down with the good needles, because grandmothers have the hands for it. Young girls threaded needles all day and passed them along, because old eyes cannot thread and young eyes can. Children ran water. Somebody's mother started cooking at midday because 60 women had not eaten. 2 women who had not spoken to each other in 11 years over a land boundary. The way these things go, ended up on the same mat, working on the same seam. Neither of them said anything about it. They just worked. People noticed. Obi and the men were sent away. Politely, firmly. They stood at the far end of the square all day, and were not allowed near it. Ndidi worked in the middle. Her hands were sore and still black to the wrist, and she sewed anyway, and every hour somebody made her stop and drink water. And at midday it went wrong. They laid out everything they had and measured it against her, and it was not enough. It was a good way short. They had a skirt and part of a bodice, and nothing else, and the pile of cloth was finished. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then somebody said, "More will come," but they were not coming any more. That was the thing. The women from the near villages had already come. The road was empty, and it was empty for a reason. Because at about 9 that morning, Mama Ifeoma had sent her younger son out on the road with a message for the neighboring villages. The message was that the wedding at Nkyo had been postponed, that the bride was unwell, and that nobody needed to trouble themselves to come. She told him to say it kindly. She was always careful about that. It very nearly worked. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that a trader's wife from Umioji had already been in the village that morning buying baskets, and had already seen the ashes, and had already gone home and told 40 women in a market what she had seen. At 1 o'clock, the road filled up. They came in a group, 11 of them, walking in from Umioji, together with cloth in their hands. And behind them, in ones and twos all afternoon, more. Somebody in that square started singing. It was a wedding song. Everybody knew it. And Mama Ifeoma stood at her stall on the other side of that square, with her good cloth stacked around her and nobody buying anything, and watched 60 women sew a wedding dress out of nothing, and understood, completely, that there was not one single thing she could do to stop it. They finished it at 20 minutes past 5. The last stitch was put in by Mama Titi because they made her do it, and her hands shook so badly that the woman beside her had to hold the cloth steady. Then they took Ndidi into a hut and shut the door, and 6 women dressed her, and nobody outside was allowed to look. The drums started at 5:30. The whole village came into that square, and the people from Obi's village, and the women from Omiwagi who had not gone home, and everybody who had walked in from the far villages that afternoon. There was no room. People stood on walls. The elders took their place. The sun was low and orange, and it was very close to the hills. And then the door opened. Ndidi came out. There is not one person who was in that square that evening who has ever been able to describe it properly. They all say the same useless things, that it was beautiful, that it shone, that the light was on it. It was made of about 80 pieces of cloth, faded green and deep red and pale gold and white and blue. Some of it was 50 years old. Some of it was 8 months old. Every single piece had been worn by a woman on the best day of her life, and had been kept in a box for years, and had been given away that morning by somebody who did not have to give it. The drums stopped. Nobody told them to. They just stopped. 300 people stood in that square in complete silence and watched a poor orphan basket weaver walk to the elders in a dress that no amount of money could have bought. And every woman in that crowd was looking for her own piece. You could see them finding it. A hand would go up to a mouth. Somebody would grip the arm of the woman beside her and point there. That one is mine. Ndidi stood before the elders. The sun was still above the hills. She was not late. Let it sit there for a moment. A village square packed so tight that people are standing on walls. Drums that have stopped on their own. An orphan girl who woke up that morning with 2 years of her life burned to ash in her own yard, standing in front of everybody in the most beautiful dress anybody in that place had ever seen, a dress that did not exist 9 hours ago. Look at the faces of the women in that crowd. Every one of them is looking for her own piece of cloth, and every one of them is finding it. And at the edge of that square, alone, in the finest cloth in the village, stands the woman who lit the fire, watching the thing she tried to destroy come back bigger than it ever was. Mama Ifeoma did not run. That is the strange part. She could have gone home. Nobody was looking at her. Everybody was looking at the bride. She stayed. She stood at the edge and watched the whole wedding, and she did not speak to anybody, and nobody spoke to her. Because they knew, not all of them, but enough. Nobody accused her. Nobody threw her out. There was no shouting. And the truth is, that would have been easier for her. 300 people celebrated together for 4 hours, and she stood at the edge of it, alone, and nobody said one word to her all night. And 3 days later, she came to Ndidi's hut. Ndidi was alone. She opened the door and found the richest woman in the village standing outside it, and she stepped back, because she did not know what else to do. Mama Ifeoma came in. She stood in the middle of that small room for a long moment. Then she said, "It was me." Ndidi did not answer. "I came into your yard before the sun. I took it out of your chest and I carried it outside and I burned it." Her voice was flat and steady. "And then I knelt down in your ashes in front of the whole village and held your hands." Still, Ndidi said nothing. "You are not going to ask me why?" "No," said Ndidi. "Why not?" "Because I have been asking myself for 3 days," Ndidi said, "and I have not thought of one single reason, so I do not think you have one either." And Mama Ifeoma, 61 years old, gold in her ears, the wealthiest woman in that village, put her hand over her face and stood in a one-room hut and cried. Then she reached into the fold of her wrapper and took out a piece of cloth. It was very old, older than Mama Titi's. It was so faded that you could barely see that it had once been orange, and it was frayed at every edge, and Ndidi saw it at once, and could not breathe for a second. It was made of 2 different pieces, joined down the middle by hand, with stitches that were not very good. "I was married in 1965, said Mama Ifeoma. Ndidi looked up. "My father was a fisherman, and we had nothing." The old woman's voice had gone strange. "I made my wedding cloth out of 2 pieces because I could not afford one. I sewed it myself, and I sewed it badly. And I stood in front of that same square, and I heard people laughing." She was not really looking at Ndidi now. "I have sold cloth in this village for 31 years. I am the woman every bride comes to. Do you know how much work that took? Mama, and then you." She said it almost gently. "A basket weaver with no mother, sewing scraps by a lamp, and the whole village saying it was the most beautiful thing they had ever seen." Her hand closed on the old orange cloth, and I looked at it, and I did not see your dress. I saw mine. I saw the girl they laughed at, and I have spent 30 years making sure that girl was dead and buried, and you brought her back into my village. The room was quiet, so I burned it," said Mama Ifeoma. "That is your reason. It is not a good one." Ndidi sat down slowly on the edge of her bed, and then she said the thing that the elders of that village still repeat. "Mama, if you had brought that cloth to my yard on the wedding morning instead of a torch," she said, "you would have been the first one. Before Mama Tita, everybody would have known your story, and everybody would have loved you for it." Mama Ifeoma did not answer. There was no answer. Ndidi stood up and took the old orange cloth out of her hand. "I am keeping this," she said. not to shame you, because it belongs with the others. They buried the ashes that month under a young tree at the edge of the square. It was Obi's idea. There was no ceremony. That tree is still there. The custom started the next year, and nobody planned it. A girl getting married that season cut a small square from her wedding cloth and gave it to Ndidi. There is a quilt in that village now. It is enormous. It is kept in the elder's house and brought out at every wedding and laid across the front of the square where the bride stands. More than 400 pieces. Every one of them came off a wedding dress. The oldest piece in it is a faded orange square, sewn from 2 pieces joined down the middle with bad stitches from a wedding in 19... Mama Ifeoma lived another 19 years. She never got back what she had been. But she was not driven out either. And in her last years, she sat with the grandmothers at every wedding and threaded needles for them. Ndidi and Obi were married 53 years. She kept the patchwork dress in the same wooden chest under her bed, and twice a year she took it out and let the young girls of the village touch it. When they asked about it, she always said the same thing. The thing she had said all along, before any of it happened. It was not made with money, she would say. It was made with patience. And then it was made again, in one day, by everybody. For the elders of that village tell their children, to this very day, an old saying that was born under that tree, that fire is fast and cloth is slow. One woman with a torch can undo in 2 minutes what one woman with a needle spent 2 years building. That is not strength. That is only speed. But a fire can burn 1 dress, and it cannot burn 80. It cannot walk to the next village and take the cloth out of a widow's box. It cannot reach into 40 years of somebody's marriage and take back the blessing. This is why the ancestors were never frightened of jealous people. A jealous heart can destroy a thing. It cannot destroy the people who would build it again. And when a whole village puts its hands to something at the same time, there is not enough fire in this world to keep up. For kindness spreads faster than fire. Fire needs dry things, and still air and something to eat. And when it runs out, it stops. Kindness has none of those rules. It goes down every road at once. It walks an hour in the heat to reach somebody it has never met. It gets up off the mat when it is 81 years old and says to a whole crowd of people, "Are the rest of you going to sit there?" And that is the only question that has ever really mattered. If Ndidi's story moved you, if you believe that no woman should ever have to stand alone, then do something for me now. Type the word patience in the comments. So I know this story reached you. Share it with someone who has been quietly building something for a long time. Subscribe to our family if you have not yet, so you never miss a story. And I will see you in the next one.